committee showed that the numerous efforts to kill Fidel Castro, organized by the Central Intelligence Agency, were to be executed by the CIA's junior partner, the Mafia.
There was a set of attempts by the CIA to assassinate foreign leaders, to assassinate Diem in Vietnam, Lumumba in the Congo, Trujillo in the Dominican Republic, and a series of attempts to assassinate Castro in Cuba.
The conspiracy to assassinate Castro first began under the Eisenhower administration, and the man who was in charge of that, the action man, was Vice President Richard Nixon. Then after Kennedy was elected, the CIA inherited that plot from the previous administration and went forward with it, not telling Kennedy all the details.
The original liaison between the CIA and the Mafia in the Castro assassination plots was Jimmy Hoffa. And Jimmy Hoffa brought 5 Mafia figures into the plots themselves. One was Russell Buffalino, the underboss of the Joseph Bonanno crime family in northeastern Pennsylvania, whose cousin was his personal attorney, William Buffalino, in Detroit. He brought in Salvador Granello and Jimmy Plumeri, 2 capos in the Tommy Lucchese crime family. He brought in John LaRocca, the boss of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he brought in Gabriel Manarino, the underboss of the Pittsburgh crime family. These 5 guys, Granello, Plumeri, Buffalino, LaRocca, and Manarino, were the initial phase of the CIA Mafia plots to assassinate Fidel Castro. As a result of this, a big spotlight came on Hoffa. He was at center stage, and anyone who came close to him was at center stage as well.
The assassination problem is not confined to Mr. Castro, and therefore it cannot be dismissed upon the grounds that Castro took actions, including making Cuba a missile base in later months, that in retrospect might have justified such extreme activity.
John Roselli represented Giancana in Las Vegas. We like to refer to him as the godfather of Las Vegas, but the truth is it's really Giancana. And Roselli's power comes from Giancana. But he also had his own, I mean, he had no problem. Now, when the CIA recruited Roselli, he brought in Sam Traficante and Sam Giancana. The unholy 3 are now working for the CIA to kill Castro.
So Hoffa, who was in this very sensitive position as the liaison between the CIA and the Mafia and the Castro assassination plots, had to be replaced. He was replaced by Bob Mayhew, who was the right-hand man to Howard Hughes. Bob Mayhew had a different approach to this. He decided that the man he wanted to get involved in the CIA plots against Castro was Santos Traficante, who had since been released from the Cuban prison. But Mayhew did not. Mayhew told me during my interviews with him that he did not know Santos Traficante personally. And he knew that in order for somebody to deal with Traficante, it was going to have to be another boss at that same level of status with Traficante. But Mayhew did not know a boss. But he did know Johnny Roselli, and this was the second stage of the CIA Mafia plots to assassinate Fidel Castro. Mayhew to Roselli, Roselli to Giancana, Giancana to Traficante.
It is likely that at the very moment President Kennedy was shot, a CIA officer was meeting with a Cuban agent in Paris and giving him an assassination device for use against Castro.
I believe it was a hypodermic syringe they'd given him with something called black leaf number 40 in it. This was in response to Amlash's request that he be provided some sort of a device whereby he could kill Castro. He returned this device to the case officer. The case officer brought it back to Washington, and that was the end of the plot. I'm sorry I didn't give him a pistol, because it would have made the whole thing a lot simpler and less exotic.
As I've said, Sam wanted Castro dead. He would have been dead. And I think my father played his hand the way he wanted to play his hands in Cuba. And the government was paying Roselli and my father good deals of money Why should he end up killing Castro? For what reason? I don't know if the laugh is on the United States or if in the CIA or if the laugh is on Sam. Castro's still alive. So, you always sit back and you try to analyze and try to think what really went wrong. Was it the CIA or was it Sam? And I'd like to think the CIA. And I think my father was milking the government for money.
In 1967, a newspaper column speculated that the assassination of President Kennedy had been the work of a plot supported by the Cuban government. The column further speculated that the plot was in reprisal for an assassination attempt against Premier Fidel Castro, which supposedly had been approved by then Attorney General Robert Kennedy. Therefore, the column implied Senator Kennedy had been indirectly responsible for his brother's death. Senator Kennedy was outraged by this column. He revealed to members of his staff that far from approving any plot to assassinate Premier Castro, he had in fact stopped such a plot immediately when he had discovered it.
My personal opinion is this town can never be completely clean. The mafia loves money. Las Vegas is money. Therefore, the mafia, in some way or the other, has its hooks into Las Vegas. It's impossible for it to happen otherwise, as far as I'm concerned.
Once again, Las Vegas is an open city. And I think a lot of these Eastern families, because they're getting pressure back where they are coming here looking for new business opportunities. I think the greater threat, and what I find to be more interesting, is the mobster in the business suit. The laundered mobster, if you will. The people who now are part of public corporations, who represent public corporations, who got their start getting loans from banks that have always had associations with the mobsters. I think the same people who have always controlled Las Vegas still control it to some extent, but it's under a new veneer of this public corporation stuff. Now, proving that is another matter. But I still feel they're still here. I think they're in the boardroom. I think, as I said, it's like a laundered mobster, a new generation mobster.
In the beginning, a pristine community of 2,000 or 3,000 people, built from a railroad watering stop in the Great Basin. A few gambling halls, saloons, and bordellos. Then came Hoover Dam. Thousands of construction workers, and with them, the fast buck artists. Faced with the economic consequences of the Great Depression in 1931, hard-pressed Nevada officials legalized casino gambling and began taxing what had always gone on here before. Not many people noticed, not until the early 1940s. That's when Las Vegas caught the eye of these two men, Meyer Lansky and Benjamin Bugsy Siegel.
I think the thing about Bugsy that was that attracted me most to writing about him was that he was this peculiar American mixture of a dreamer with a great romantic vision of something and a practical man at the same time. Because everybody can have romantic visions, but making them concrete and bringing them to life often eludes most of us. So he had this vision that was based on understanding the future. He knew that several things were going to change the American West. Air conditioning, for example, meant that you could then build a place in the desert, with the perfection of small unit air conditioning that allowed hotel rooms to exist in the desert. That was one of the things. He also knew, I'm sure, that after World War II, the great migration that would happen in the United States would be west. That all these guys that saw California for the first time in the Army were going to go west. They weren't coming back to the ghettos of New York. They're going out there. He had that vision, and his vision was a kind of like a Neapolitan dream of heaven, I mean, it had to be, fountains and women and gambling. Everything that was illegal everywhere else would be legal in Nevada. And it was like the triumph of the Baroque, which is what Las Vegas is. It's the last Baroque city, after Prague, I guess.
Well, he was a good-looking, handsome man. He was exciting, and he had visions. I think they should erect a statue for him in Las Vegas because he built that famous flamingo. It was like out in the middle of the desert.
He was a good father. We had great feelings with him. He was very kind, but he expected us to be a certain way, and we were. I mean, I won't say we were scared of him, but we wanted to do what he wanted us to do. We wanted him to be proud of us. My mother was a distant person. She was loving but very distant at most of the time, and my relationship was closer with my father than it was with my mother. He was away a lot building the hotel when we were growing up, and it was a nice time when he came back or when we went to visit him. My parents were divorced, which I guess you know. So we lived in New York and he was out here at the time. And as a young child, we all lived together. He had to quit school when he was in the 3rd or 4th grade to work. And he said that it was very difficult at the time, that money was very scarce, and he had a younger brother and sisters that he had to help support, us, his father and mother. And it was just a difficult time. And at that point, I guess, Prohibition came around, which was not so terrible. And that's when he first started to make some money. And they all lived a little bit better and had a better life. I think when I first found out, and people would say to me, that was your father, and talk about me behind my back, or talk about my father behind my back, and make comments, it hurt terribly. I'm very proud of who I am. I'm very proud of him. And it was just a hard time growing up from then on. I've never hidden who I am, and I will defend him as long as I can.
Everybody thinks, he was such a philanderer and a movie star. Somehow Virginia Hill owned him. He was like talking to a cocktail waitress in the Flamingo, right? And being very nice to her. Virginia Hill walked up and punched her right in the mouth. Knocked her on the floor, and they're tearing Bugsy's tearing Virginia Hill off this woman. Then he hits her, Virginia Hill. and she runs off, right? And takes a whole bottle of sleeping pills. Oh, my